The artificial planet of Ethelgard hung like a gilded jewel against the black velvet of space, its ornate spires and crystalline domes gleaming with artificial light. From the orbital approach, it appeared a perfect geometric marvel, symmetrical, ordered, and exquisite. Ambassador Kalen had long since learned to look beyond its superficial beauty. After 4 decades serving as the Xylar representative to the Athelian Empire, he had come to see the planet's city as it truly was, a monument to excess, stagnation, and the illusion of permanence. As his diplomatic shuttle descended toward the Grand Synod Hall, the heart of imperial governance, Kalen adjusted the drape of his formal robes. The Xylar were known throughout the galaxy for their calm temperament and diplomatic acumen, traits that had kept their species relatively safe under Athelian rule. His pale, blue skin contrasted with the deep indigo of his ceremonial attire, marking him as a senior diplomat among his kind. Another emergency session, he murmured to no one in particular, watching the sprawling governmental complex grow larger in the view screen. Another day of listening to Valerius pontificate while the galaxy crumbles around him. The shuttle docked with practiced precision at one of the thousands of identical landing platforms that surrounded the Grand Synod Hall like petals around a monstrous flower. Kalen joined the stream of dignitaries, ambassadors, and imperial officials flowing toward the entrance. A river of diverse species united only by their expensive attire and the careful masks of deference they all wore. The Grand Synod Hall itself was a masterpiece of imperial architecture, a vast hemispherical chamber whose ceiling was an exact replica of the night sky as seen from Luminera, the lost ancestral home of the luminous species who had founded and still ruled the empire. 5,000 crystalline seats arranged in perfect concentric circles descended toward a central podium where Emperor Valerius VII would soon stand. The floor was polished Solarian marble, imported at staggering expense from quarries 3 sectors away, its surface so reflective that walking across it gave the unsettling impression of floating above the abyss. Ambassador Kalen, a voice called as he took his assigned place in the diplomatic tier. What an unexpected pleasure. Kalen turned to find himself facing Simbali, a Terran journalist known for her probing questions and barely concealed anti-imperial sentiments. How she maintained her credentials was a minor mystery within diplomatic circles. Hardly unexpected, Kalen replied with practiced neutrality. I am required to attend all emergency sessions. Of course, Simbali smiled, her dark eyes bright with undisguised curiosity. But I meant it's unexpected to find you without your usual entourage of aides. This session must be particularly sensitive. Kalen inclined his head slightly. The Emperor's office indicated this session would address matters of galactic security. Beyond that, I know as little as you do. This was not entirely true. Rumors have been circulating through back channels for weeks about a major policy shift regarding the Rimward territories, the frontier regions where Imperial control had always been tenuous at best. These were also the regions where the so-called Free Systems Alliance had been gaining support, transitioning from what the Empire dismissed as a terrorist nuisance to something approaching a legitimate insurgency. I hear the Rimward delegates are particularly anxious today, Simbali remarked casually, confirming Kalen's suspicions about the session's purpose. Several haven't even shown up. Perhaps they were delayed, Kalen offered non-committally, though he suspected their absence might be more deliberate, a minor protest against whatever proclamation was coming. The ambient lighting dimmed gradually, signaling the imminent start of proceedings. The murmur of 5,000 conversations faded to a respectful hush as ceremonial guards in glittering armor took positions around the chamber. The elaborate ritual of imperial governance was beginning, a pageant that had remained essentially unchanged for millennia. First came the ceremonial heralds, striking their crystal staffs against the marble floor in perfect synchronization, creating a sound like the ringing of massive bells. Then the Lumina High Council members filed in, 12 ancient beings whose luminescent skin gave their species its name, their faces impassive beneath the weight of their elaborate headdresses. Last came the Imperial Praetorian Guard, 24 elite warriors in armor that incorporated technology so advanced it might as well have been magic to most citizens of the Empire. And finally, preceded by a flourish of archaic music, Emperor Valerius VII himself appeared. Even Kalen, who prided himself on his immunity to imperial propaganda, couldn't help but feel a momentary awe. The Emperor was the epitome of Lumina genetic perfection, tall and slender, with skin that seemed to capture and amplify light, giving him an almost divine radiance. He wore the imperial regalia, robes woven from materials so rare that their cost could have fed entire planetary systems for years. The crown of unified stars sat upon his brow, each of its points representing a major system brought under imperial rule. As was traditional, Valerius ascended to the central podium on a gravity-defying platform, ensuring that he literally floated above everyone else in the chamber. The symbolism was hardly subtle. Esteemed representatives of the eternal Athelian Empire, the Emperor began, his voice enhanced by acoustical technology, to reach every corner of the vast hall without seeming artificially amplified. I have summoned you here to witness the dawn of a new era of unity and prosperity. Kalen maintained his diplomatic mask, but internally he sighed. He had heard this opening dozens of times before, and it invariably preceded announcements that would bring neither unity nor prosperity to anyone except the central imperial worlds. For too long, we have allowed misguided elements in our rimward territories to mistake our patience for weakness, Valerius continued, his tone hardening. For too long, we have tolerated local governance that fails to prioritize the collective good of our glorious empire. For too long, we have permitted the cancer of rebellion to fester in our frontier worlds. The Emperor paused, surveying the silent assembly with the confidence of someone who had never faced meaningful opposition. Today, I announce the Supreme Unification Decree, a comprehensive strategy to strengthen imperial presence throughout the rimward territories. This decree will standardize taxation, centralize governance, and deploy additional military assets to ensure compliance with imperial law. A ripple of tension passed through the assembly. Even through the carefully maintained diplomatic facades, Kalen could sense the shock and dismay from delegates representing rimward systems. The decree was essentially a declaration of martial law across a third of the empire, regions already suffering from resource extraction and economic exploitation. Furthermore, Valerius continued, seemingly oblivious to or simply unconcerned with the reaction. All organizations affiliated with or sympathetic to the terrorist group calling itself the Free Systems Alliance will be immediately disbanded. Any world found harboring FSA operatives will be subject to. The massive doors at the rear of the Grand Senate Hall exploded inward with a thunderous crash. 5,000 heads turned in unison. The silence that followed was absolute, a vacuum of sound that seemed to suck all air from the chamber. A single figure stood in the ruined doorway, silhouetted against the light from the corridor beyond. For a moment, no one moved, not the Emperor, not the Praetorian Guard, not the assembled delegates. It was as if time itself had been suspended by the sheer impossibility of what was happening. The figure stepped forward, and gasps rippled through the assembly. It was a human, a Terran, wearing battered combat armor that bore the unmistakable insignia of the Free Systems Alliance. But not just any rebel. This was Commander Eris Thorn, the infamous FSA leader whom Imperial news networks had reported executed over a year ago. He moved with the fluid grace of a veteran soldier, each step purposeful. Most shocking of all, he carried no visible weapons, entering the heart of Imperial power seemingly unarmed. The Praetorian Guard recovered from their initial shock and moved to intercept him, their energy weapons powering up with an ominous hum. Thorn didn't break stride. As the first guard reached him, Thorn executed a move so fast it was difficult to follow, some combination of martial arts technique and technological assistance from his armor. The guard crumpled, his advanced armor suddenly seeming to malfunction. The other guards attacked in coordinated pairs, exactly as their training dictated. Thorn countered with moves that seemed to anticipate their every action. One by one, the elite Imperial warriors fell, their weapons and armor rendered useless by whatever countermeasures were built into Thorn's seemingly primitive combat suit. In less than 30 seconds, the most elite fighting force in the galaxy lay incapacitated, and Thorn continued his unwavering advance toward Emperor Valerius VII, who remained frozen on his hovering platform. "This is impossible," someone whispered, loud enough to be heard in the deathly silence. "The security systems, the scanners, the psychic shields." Kalen watched, transfixed, as Thorn reached the central podium. With a gesture that appeared almost casual, the rebel leader activated some device on his wrist. The Emperor's gravity platform sputtered and failed, depositing Valerius unceremoniously onto the marble floor, where he sprawled like a discarded doll. Before the Emperor could regain his footing or dignity, Thorn seized him by the ornate collar of his ceremonial robes. The rebel's face, weathered, scarred, but strikingly calm, came close to the Emperor's perfect features. No words were exchanged, no grand speech delivered. Instead, Thorn did something so unthinkable that many would later question their own memories of the event. He began to drag Emperor Valerius VII across the floor of the Grand Synod Hall. The sound of the Emperor's priceless regalia scraping against marble echoed through the chamber. Valerius struggled, his face contorted with rage and disbelief, but Thorn's grip was unbreakable. The rebel dragged the living god of the Athelian Empire like a petulant child throwing a tantrum, leaving a path of disturbed reflection on the pristine floor. 5,000 of the most powerful beings in the galaxy watched in absolute silence. Security forces seemed paralyzed. Communications devices failed to function. Recording systems mysteriously shut down. The galaxy's elite found themselves reduced to powerless spectators. When Thorn reached the shattered doors with his royal captive, he paused. Turning to face the stunned assembly, the rebel commander spoke the only words he would utter during the entire incident. "The age of false gods is over." Then he was gone, pulling the Emperor of 1,000 star systems into the corridor beyond, leaving behind only the echo of his words and the impossible reality of what had just occurred. The silence persisted for 3 full heartbeats after Thorn disappeared with the Emperor. Then, like a dam breaking, chaos erupted. "Secure the perimeter. Contact the Imperial fleet. The Emperor has been abducted. We're under attack." Voices overlapped in a cacophony of panic and outrage. Dignitaries rushed for exits that security forces were already sealing. Others clustered in species-based groups, seeking safety in numbers. Many simply remained frozen in their seats, unable to process the collapse of a power structure they had believed unassailable. Ambassador Kalen remained still, his diplomatic training asserting itself even in this unprecedented crisis. He observed as various officials attempted to use their communication devices, only to find them non-functional. Something, or someone, had created a massive signal disruption field encompassing the entire governmental complex. "It appears we are isolated," observed a calm voice beside him. Kalen turned to find Simbali, the Terran journalist, looking remarkably composed given the circumstances. Her eyes gleamed with what might have been professional interest or perhaps something deeper. "This was meticulously planned," Kalen replied quietly. "The timing, the security failures, the communications blackout." He trailed off, considering the implications. "This is not just a kidnapping. This is a statement. The most profound political statement in a millennium," Simbali agreed. "He didn't kill Valerius. He humiliated him, in front of the entire ruling class. Around them, the initial shock was giving way to frantic activity. The High Council members were attempting to establish a command hierarchy in the Emperor's absence. Military officers present for the session were organizing the conscious Praetorians and regular security forces. Various powerful delegates were demanding priority evacuation. "We should attempt to gather information," Kalen suggested, his diplomatic instincts shifting toward practical action. "This chamber has become useless." Simbali nodded, and together they made their way toward one of the side exits, navigating through groups of agitated delegates. Their calm demeanor and purposeful movement allowed them to pass through security checkpoints where others were being detained for their safety. Once in the less crowded peripheral corridors, they encountered a young Calbraxian aide clutching an antiquated communication device. Ambassador. The aide acknowledged Kalen with obvious relief. The main networks are down, but I've managed to establish connection with some external sources using old radio frequencies. What news? Kalen asked. The aide's 4 eyes blinked in rapid sequence, a sign of extreme stress in a species. Chaos, sir. The Imperial banking network has collapsed. The central energy grid is experiencing cascading failures across 12 sectors. Military communications are scrambled. And, he hesitated, lowering his voice, reports are coming in of simultaneous uprisings on at least 20 rimward worlds. Coordinated, Simbali murmured. Perfectly coordinated. There's more, the aide continued. Some kind of unknown technology is infiltrating and overriding Imperial systems. Military vessels report complete system failures. Automated defense networks are shutting down or, in some cases, changing targeting parameters. Kalen felt a chill run through him. What kind of technology could possibly? The Umbral Network, Simbali interjected, her voice barely above a whisper. Both Kalen and the aide turned to her. A rumor, she explained. Something my sources in the Rimward territories have mentioned. Discovered technology, possibly ancient, possibly alien. Something the FSA supposedly found in deep space. The Empire dismissed it as propaganda. Clearly, Kalen said dryly, the Empire was mistaken. Over the next several hours, Kalen used every diplomatic connection and backchannel at his disposal to piece together what was happening outside the governmental complex. The picture that emerged was astonishing. The Free Systems Alliance, long dismissed as a minor annoyance by Imperial authorities, had apparently been building toward this moment for years. The Umbral Network, whatever it actually was, had given them the ability to penetrate, control, or disable almost any Imperial technology. They had used this advantage not for wholesale destruction, but for precisely targeted system failures that effectively paralyzed the Empire's ability to respond while minimizing civilian casualties. Most shocking were the political developments. As news of the Emperor's humiliation spread, despite Imperial attempts at information control, dozens of worlds formerly loyal to the Empire had declared neutrality or openly pledged support to the FSA. The carefully maintained facade of Imperial invincibility had shattered, and the aftermath was revealing just how fragile the actual structure had been. Ambassador Kalen, a voice called, pulling him from his thoughts. He turned to find a young human woman in nondescript clothing, someone who would be instantly forgettable in a crowd. Commander Thorne requests your presence as a neutral mediator. Kalen maintained his diplomatic composure despite his surprise. How do you propose to transport me? The complex is locked down. The woman smiled slightly. The same way we got Commander Thorne in. Please, time is of the essence. After a moment's consideration, Kalen nodded. I will need to bring others, neutral representatives, to form a balanced delegation. Already arranged, the woman replied. Ambassador Tleth of the Moravian Concordat and Historian Vox of the Academic Union are waiting at the rendezvous point. The rendezvous point turned out to be an ancient maintenance sublevel beneath the Grand Senate Hall, accessible through service corridors that had apparently been removed from official schematics centuries ago. Tleth and Vox were indeed waiting, both known for their unaligned positions in galactic politics. Their journey through the hidden underbelly of Ethelgard's governmental complex revealed an unexpected truth. The gleaming capital of the Athelian Empire was built upon forgotten foundations, its perfect geometric precision concealing layers of history that had been systematically erased from official records. The Empire is built on buried truths, their guide explained as they passed through what appeared to be ancient living quarters. What you're seeing hasn't been accessed by Imperial authorities in over 500 years. They built over it, sealed it, and deleted it from their archives. After nearly an hour of walking through these hidden spaces, They emerged into what had once been a secondary command center, now repurposed as an FSA forward base. Dozens of operatives worked at makeshift stations, monitoring communications and coordinating what appeared to be a galaxy-wide operation. And there, in the center of this improvised headquarters, stood Eris Thorn. In person, away from the dramatic context of the Grand Senate Hall, the FSA commander appeared both more ordinary and more extraordinary. He was of average height for a human, his face bearing the marks of hard years, scars, weathered skin, eyes that had seen too much death. Yet there was something in his bearing that commanded attention. Not the manufactured aura of imperial authority, but something more authentic. Nearby, under guard but not physically restrained, sat Emperor Valerius VII. His magnificent regalia was rumpled and stained, the crown of unified stars removed. Without these trappings and the technological enhancements of the imperial podium, he seemed diminished, still recognizably lumina, but no longer godlike. Ambassador Kalen. Thorn greeted him, his voice measured and calm, so different from the passionate revolutionary that imperial propaganda had portrayed. Thank you for coming. The same thanks to Ambassador Tleth and historian Vox. You've created quite a situation, Commander, Kalen replied neutrally. A ghost of a smile touched Thorn's lips. We've revealed a situation that already existed, Ambassador. There's a difference. You dragged the Emperor through the Grand Senate Hall like a criminal, Tleth observed, her feathered crest rising slightly, a sign of both agitation and interest in her species. I treated him as what he is, Thorn responded, a man who has committed crimes against countless beings. The crime was not today's action, but the millennium of pretense that preceded it. What do you want from us? Kalen asked, cutting to the heart of the matter. To witness, to understand, and if you find our cause, just to help mediate the transition that must now occur. Thorn gestured toward a large conference table. Please sit. There is much to explain. Over the next 2 hours, Thorn and several of his top advisors presented evidence that left Kalen profoundly disturbed. The Umbral Network, it turned out, was not merely a technological system, but a repository of historical records, an archive created by an ancient civilization that had witnessed the rise of the Athelian Empire. These records documented atrocities that had been systematically erased from official history. The genocide of species that had opposed Lumina expansion, the deliberate cultural destruction of potential rival civilizations, the genetic tampering that had created entire species of servant beings. Most damning were the records regarding the Lumina themselves. The godlike qualities that had justified their rule, their luminescent skin, their mild psychic abilities, their extended lifespans, were not natural evolutionary traits, but the results of extensive genetic engineering performed by their ancestors. They created themselves in the image of divinity, Thorn explained, and then destroyed all evidence of their origins. The mystical homeworld of Luminera, a fabrication, the divine mandate to rule, a calculated myth. Emperor Valerius, who had remained silent throughout the presentation, finally spoke, his voice lacking its usual artificial resonance, but still dripping with contempt. Forgeries and fabrications. You expect these representatives to believe propaganda created by terrorist malcontents. The verification protocols are embedded in the data, countered a Chistari scientist on Thorn's team. The quantum signatures cannot be falsified. This is why we haven't simply broadcast this information galaxy-wide. We want independent verification by neutral parties first. Historian Vox, who had been examining the data with professional intensity, looked up. These verification markers are consistent with precursor documentation standards. If these are forgeries, they are beyond any technological capability I am familiar with. What exactly do you hope to achieve? Kalen asked Thorn, his mind racing through the implications. The Empire spans thousands of worlds. Even with the Umbral Network's capabilities and these revelations, you cannot simply erase a power structure that has existed for millennia. We don't intend to, Thorn replied. We intend to transform it. Not destruction, evolution. He activated a holographic display showing a complex organizational structure. This is our proposal for a galactic charter. A federal system replacing imperial autocracy. Equal representation for all sentient species. Regional autonomy with central coordination rather than control. Fair resource distribution. The emperor becomes a constitutional figurehead, a symbol of continuity but without absolute power. You expect me to agree to this farce? Valerius interjected. Thorn regarded him calmly. You will agree, or we will release the complete historical archive to every being in the galaxy. Your choice is between a dignified transition where the Lumina maintain respect as equals, or a collapse where they become reviled as tyrants and deceivers. Consider your people's future, not just your pride. The Emperor fell silent, his luminescent features unreadable. And if these terms are not accepted by the imperial power structure, Pleth asked, we control their communication systems, their financial networks, their military command protocols, and their energy grids, Thorn said simply. We could dismantle the empire piece by piece. We would prefer not to. Kalen studied Thorn carefully. Why involve us? Why not simply impose these terms with the power you clearly possess? Because tyranny with different masters is still tyranny, Thorn replied. We seek legitimacy, not just power. The transition must be witnessed and mediated by respected neutral parties. It must be seen as necessary evolution, not merely conquest by different means. The negotiations that followed would later be recorded in history texts as the Silent Revolution, a name that acknowledged both the absence of massive bloodshed and the galaxy's stunned silence as ancient power structures reconfigured virtually overnight. Kalen found himself in the unexpected role of chief mediator between the FSA, imperial loyalists, corporate interests, and thousands of planetary governments suddenly forced to reconsider their positions in a transformed galaxy. The task was monumental, exhausting, and arguably the most important diplomatic work ever. Undertaken, resistance came, as expected, from hardline imperial factions. Several military commanders attempted uprisings, only to find their ships unresponsive or their targeting systems redirected. Corporate cartels tried economic sabotage, only to discover their entire financial infrastructure was now transparently visible to everyone. Religious orders that had deified the Lumina faced crises of faith as the truth of their origins became impossible to deny. Through it all, Thorn maintained a surprisingly moderate approach. There are no mass arrests, no public executions of imperial officials, no wholesale confiscation of Lumina property. Instead, the FSA focused on systematic reform, replacing structures rather than merely decapitating them. Emperor Valerius VII, after 3 days of isolation and consideration, agreed to address the galaxy. Under the watchful eye of Thorn, present but unobtrusive in the background, he announced his support for the new galactic charter. His performance was wooden, his luminescence noticeably dimmed by stress and humiliation, but the symbolic impact was undeniable. The emperor who had been dragged across the floor of his own Senate was now voluntarily transferring absolute power to a representative council. 2 weeks after the historic dragging incident, Kalen stood alone in the Grand Senate Hall, now undergoing extensive renovations to accommodate the first session of the new Galactic Federal Council. The concentric seating was being rebuilt to create a level arrangement where no species or faction would literally look down on others. The reflective marble floor, that perfect symbol of imperial grandeur and detachment, was being replaced with practical materials sourced from worlds throughout the galaxy. Quite a transformation, observed Symboli, approaching from side entrance. The journalist had been documenting the transition with unprecedented access, both the physical space and what it represents. Indeed, Kalen agreed. Though I wonder what structures we're building over now, what truths might be hidden beneath our new foundations. Symboli smiled slightly. A healthy skepticism, Ambassador. Perhaps that's the most important change. The right to question, to doubt, to verify. Commander Thorn did not attend yesterday's planning session, Kalen noted. Is he distancing himself now that the transition is underway? On the contrary, Symboli replied. He's meeting with representatives from the former Imperial Academy of Sciences. Something about making the Umbral Network's technology available for peaceful research. He seems determined to ensure this revolution doesn't simply exchange one privileged group for another. Kalen nodded thoughtfully. His method was shocking, deliberately so, yet his governance has been surprisingly measured. Dragging the Emperor could have led to chaos or vengeance. Instead, it became a catalyst for systematic change. They walked together to the massive viewport that dominated one wall of the chamber, looking out over the artificial splendor of Ethelgard. Already, the formerly exclusive governmental district was opening to representatives of species and factions that had never before been permitted in the imperial capital. The homogeneity was giving way to diversity, the sterile perfection to vibrant complexity. Will it last? Kalen wondered aloud. This peaceful transition, this federal structure? Or are we merely witnessing the beginning of a new cycle of conflict and dominance? That, said Simbali, may depend on how well we remember the silence. Kalen looked at her questioningly. The silence of the galaxy as it watched an emperor being dragged across his own floor, she explained. It wasn't just shock, Ambassador. It was recognition. Recognition that power, no matter how ancient or seemingly divine, is ultimately a collective agreement. When enough beings withdraw their consent, even gods can be dragged. Kalen turned back to the viewport, watching as ships from 100 worlds converged on the former imperial capital. The galaxy was no longer silent. It roared with millions of voices, debates, disagreements, and possibilities. Whatever emerged from this transformation would be messier, more complex, and potentially more fragile than the monolithic empire it replaced. Yet as he observed a group of Terran children, representatives of thorn species, playing alongside young Lumina in a courtyard below, Kalen felt something he had not experienced in his long diplomatic career: genuine hope. Perhaps the dragging of an emperor would lead not just to the replacement of one power structure with another, but to something truly revolutionary, a galaxy where power itself was understood differently. The silence had been broken, and in its place was a cacophony of possibility.